Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar, Search and Synergy, How to Optimize Search Based on a Complete Cross-Media View of Marketing ROI. We will be getting started in a few minutes, but first I wanted to go over some housekeeping items. Today's webinar is being recorded, and a video of the recording will be emailed to you. If at any time you have questions, please type them into the chat box. If you have additional questions after the webinar, please feel free to email Rex or Darcy. Their contact information is located on the screen. Now I would like to introduce Rex Briggs, and CEO of Marketing Evolution, and co-host Darcy Jewett, Director of Digital Solutions. As many of you know, Rex has been working with Fortune 500 companies to improve marketing ROI for more than 2 decades. He is a leading expert in unlocking ROI profits through measurement and is credited with pioneering many digital measurement techniques, including post-click analysis, attribution modeling, and cross-media measurement. Darcy serves as Director of Digital Solutions at Marketing Evolution. In her role, she leads the firm on digital innovations in measurement, software advancement, data sourcing, and new media such as programmatic buying and social media. Since 2010, Darcy has worked with marketers across verticals to help them understand and make the most of their digital media efforts. Darcy and Rex, I will hand it over to you now to get started.
Great, thank you. This is Rex Briggs, and I am thrilled to have so many of our clients and some other interested parties on this webinar, which is titled, as you can see, Search Synergy and Data Connectedness. We want to start off with a little bit of trivia. I'm going to give you maybe 5-10 minutes of background, and then really hand it over to Darcy to do the main talking about what we've learned here and how we're applying it. And then we're going to jump back and do a little bit of Q&A at the end. So if you have questions, by all means, type them into the questions area. We'll be going through those and organizing them for the tail end of the discussion. So here's a poll, which is a quick question, which is really how old is attribution modeling? So go ahead and type in your responses here and click Submit. Okay. Votes are coming in. We'll give it another few seconds here to wrap that up. And I'll close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, votes are in. So let's go ahead and show the results. So most people identify the age at a range, and it's been interesting because there's been a lot of different discussion here about very recently about attribution modeling, particularly in the digital space. In the digital space, the attribution modeling, I'll go back, and Darcy, if you want to go ahead and take over the slides and bring it back to the main part here, I'll give you a little bit of background about some of our experience here. In some ways, you can look at attribution modeling as really being several decades old, because it's really about looking at the chain of events that might occur to drive an action, and you can do that with lots of different types of regression-based modeling. But really in the digital part, well, the internet hasn't been around for 28 years, so that answer is not going to be quite right for what we're going to talk about today. But it is right in terms of 18 years from when we first saw the first applications to it as it relates to search. And I probably should have made the poll question a little bit more specific as we relate to digital search. To give you a little bit of history here, in 1995 I joined Wired magazine and Hot Wired, the website. And we began to do advertising, and we were able to implement some of the first uses of registration and then cookies later on as we got rid of registration to track how many pages people looked at. And the number of pages people looked at certainly created value, so we could then divide people from those who were creating a lot of value, looking at lots of pages and therefore seeing lots of advertising, and those who maybe only looked at a couple different pages. What became an important question was, well, how did advertising help bring people to that website and create value? And so in 1995 and through 1996, we did some of the first attribution modeling to look at the impact of search and other forms of advertising on bringing traffic to the website. it only took me about 24 hours after looking at the first report to realize, I wonder if that ad that we have in Wired magazine promoting the digital website might be increasing people's likelihood to do a search or when they see an advertisement to click on that advertisement. And that began really the beginning of pondering how could we look at attribution modeling beyond last click and look at something more realistic, which is how the combination of different media and marketing factors lead to somebody coming in and becoming of value to a business. So it certainly has taken us many years to make some advances. It took really to connect. We began to connect the online part pretty quickly thereafter. But then the question of, okay, well, what if somebody is involved with your brand online but actually buy something offline? So what happens in that same Wired magazine scenario where they come to know the brand through the digital website and then they buy and become a subscriber in the offline world, or they buy from the newsstand? Again, that began to push us more towards this multi-channel, multi-touch point attribution modeling question. By 2005, we had actually published the first work that looked at the online-offline impact. You can find that on the Wiley publications labeled Integrated Multi-Channel Communication Strategies. And that was some work that we did on Ford F-150. And we were looking at how people who were exposed to, there are over $100 million marketing campaign in all kinds of different channels, how that led people to ultimately buy that vehicle. And one of the key breakouts with cooperation of Google was the ability to match up and join the Google searches and ultimately connect those to name and addresses, and we could connect that to people who actually bought the vehicles and see to what degree search increased the probability of someone buying that vehicle. A really critical component in figuring out how to do that was figuring out how we could begin to create control groups so we could really baseline to see how many people would have taken that action without advertising or without search. And by the next year, 2006, we published the study on 1-800-Flowers, which Darcy will talk about more today as really establishing this foundation of being able to integrate control and expose experiments in out of home, in television, in digital advertising, and ultimately to a large degree in search as well, but the ability to then see how the combination of those factors work together to produce a sale, whether that sale happened on the website, or it happened in the call center, or it happened in the physical retail channel. And so that study, 2006, for 1-800-Flowers, is pretty seminal because it lays out the way in which one can attack this problem of attribution modeling. So I've given you a little bit of the history and the background. I will say that probably the most important lesson that I've learned through this is that if you don't have some ability to use control groups, it is very easy to game the attribution modeling. It's very easy to get the wrong impression about search's impact. And the reason why I say that is that now that we have so much behavioral targeting and so much ability to say, hey, I want to deliver this ad to this person who looks like a really good prospect, there's a self-fulfilling prophecy where that person that you've modeled to be a good prospect is likely to, in fact, buy that product. But that doesn't answer the question whether or not the search contributed to that sale or the advertisement contributed to that sale or the combination of advertising and search contributed to that sale. For that, we need to dig a bit deeper and really structure the analysis in a way that we can see what would have happened if that activity, that advertisement, that search opportunity, the paid search or so forth, wasn't part of that experience for that consumer. So I hope to have a really robust dialogue and discussion today, and we'll go ahead and hand it over to Darcy to take you through some of our learning. Darcy?
Thanks, Rex. Hi, everyone. It's really nice to be speaking with you today. Thanks for taking the time. And thanks, Rex, for the good look back at where we've been in this space I want to use a little time now to talk through where we are now and maybe where we're going. What I'm hoping is that by the end of the session, you'll have a good idea of why we at Marketing Evolution feel that particularly individual level data connectedness is so important to success, and have passed on some tips and guidance for getting a data hub set up to begin to really take advantage of what you have and start affecting change in areas such as search. We're going to talk a bit about data connectedness at a higher level, drill down into search a bit, and then talk a little about where we're going to be able to go from here in the digital space. So I'll start with a story. Valentine's Day was a little more than a week ago, and I count myself lucky to have had a Valentine again this year. My husband got me flowers that he ordered online. I know he searched with flower delivery before choosing a website and perusing the options and making a selection. A few years ago, as Rex mentioned, we took a look at people like my husband in a case study that we did with 1-800-Flowers. We did some attribution modeling and found that search drove 16% of sales, which was cool. But we were looking at search in its own silo. And we all know that that can't possibly be the case, as Rex mentioned. Something drove my husband to think about buying flowers in the first place, perhaps a TV ad or a spot on the radio. And something also made him decide to click through and visit and buy from the particular company that he chose. Cross-channel attribution modeling and linking those touch points on the purchase highway to an individual person like my husband can help us get at those answers. So let's talk a little about data connections in general. If you have heard about Marketing Evolution's approach before, you'll be familiar with this idea of the ROI Brain. We feel that real positive results are achieved when you look across each aspect of your marketing machine and keep things working together. So the various pieces of the ROI Brain facilitate that by allowing you to track marketing and external factors with the mission control dashboard, manage your calendar and creative optimizations, and employ best practices, etc. Today we're going to focus on marketing analytics, modeling analytics, and impact-based budget allocations, and the value that comes from looking at the individual person and their place in monitoring campaign success and forming a budget plan. All those parts of the ROI Brain coalesce around these three tenets in our Agile system. The first is in-market, getting the information you need to make the right adjustments at the right time. Second is focusing on the customer and considering their journey along the purchase highway. And then lastly, connected. There's so much data out there, it can be really hard to make it actionable. And this is where we're going to really focus today. You may have your Google reporting with clicks and conversions over here, your TV viewership data over here, and your digital rich media engagements over there. But what's the overall story? By considering carefully your measures for success and connecting those dots, there's a lot that can be gained. So let's do another quick poll. How do you feel your media reporting is working together? And I've got three options here that I think it's completely working together. I feel I understand how success in one media connects to success in another, and all the pieces come together for the same answer. I somewhat feel it's working together. Some comes together, but not all. Some is separate. And then the last is not at all. I feel like all my media are being planned and managed in separate silos, and one report can contradict the rest. So I'll open the poll here. Give everyone a sec. Okay, give everyone just maybe 10 more seconds. All right. So we have broad consensus on this particular poll. It seems like almost everyone on the phone felt that their data was somewhat connected. And that's a great place to be, really, because the more pieces you're being able to put together, the clearer your answers are going to be. But hopefully from here we can give you some ideas and tips on how to pull even more information together to achieve your best results. I'm going to hide this now. So what does truly connected data look like? Marketing Evolution's approach uses both aggregated time series data and individual consumer level data. On the time series side, we get a helicopter view of the landscape in which our marketing partners are operating. So looking at external factors across a large number of variables can really set the scene in which advertising plays out. But what we're looking at in terms of media effectiveness, attribution, and budget planning is this individual level data set here on the right. What we want here is to understand each touch point for each person. An attribution model that's not getting all of this data at an individual level is going to be misattributing impact to later touch points, almost in its very nature. By adding web analytics data to this data set is how we're going to be fueling our search analysis. So working with marketers' web analytics systems like Omniture or Web Trends, we can include as rows in this table information about whether or not an individual searched, how many times they searched, and what keywords they used, and what they did on the website once they got there. And we'd be matching that with information about the exposures they've had to digital and traditional media, brand health metrics, sales, both online and offline, segments and demographics. And by pulling that all together, we're able to get a full story to make the proper attributions and down the road budget recommendations. So here's what your data connection hub may look like today. Maybe you're already connecting more than this on an individual level. But a typical brand effectiveness study or a ROMO study in years past might pull these pieces together: traditional and online media exposure, brand attitudes, demographics, and maybe a link to sales. And that's a start. It's enough to get a sense of what's going on in the big picture, even if you really aren't seeing the whole picture clearly. But if some is good, more is much better. Marketing Evolution has worked hard with a multitude of data providers to nail the process for pulling this data together. And in a few months' time, there's so many additional touch points that we could be adding to this to fill in the picture. Store purchases, online purchases, website visits, search behavior, online segments, Facebook, direct mail, email. With each addition, attribution will become more accurate, and the picture will become clearer. So how exactly does better data shape those better answers? In three key ways, I think. The first, as we've talked a little bit about now, is attribution. You can look at various reporting sources and feel like you understand how your search efforts are doing or how your digital or TV or print efforts are doing. But looking at them in isolation misses the colossal fact that none of this is happening in a vacuum. What leads someone to search in the first place? Did a combination of media exposures across different channels contribute to the combined positive reaction of an individual? Getting this data allows you to see how your media buys and external factors are coming together and then properly pull them back apart across all touch points to what's really driving action. The second is creating a data hub. As we've talked about, having a lot of data doesn't really mean you have actionable data. If you're able to pull disparate pieces of information together and tie them to an individual, you're able to really look against your key overall metric for marketing success and affect change. The third way is that better data helps pull together in a data hub means that you're not going to be battling conflicting pieces of information. When everything's connected, things will roll up and down to the same answers that make sense. So we talked in the first section here on a high level about how all that data is awesome, and it is. But I think we need an example to bring things together, and search is the perfect place for that. It's a media channel that should be considered alongside other media channels for the share of a marketing budget, but is also a last touch point that's highly impacted by other marketing efforts, as Rex described. So if we go back to 1-800-Flowers, we left folks like my husband, and they had searched and purchased, and looking at that alone, we attributed 16% of total sales to search. But when other media exposure was incorporated, such as digital display in this case, we saw that 16% was not accurate. And actually 14% of those sales, or 2.2% of the total, were really driven by digital display exposure. So knowing this allowed 1-800-Flowers to make more powerful choices. And if you think about all the touch points that you may have beyond digital into the traditional space, imagine what taking this to the next level and really pulling all of that together might mean. You could answer questions like, which ads on Facebook drove to which search terms? Did a particular radio ad drive people to Facebook and then to search and finally to the site and to making a purchase offline? Or did a TV campaign drive people to search, and were the resulting sales stronger than from other sources? As Rex talked about when he was discussing control groups a little, because search is a last touch point before purchase, without connecting those dots, it's almost certain that we'll give search more attribution than it really deserves. People who are searching are far more likely to be aware of your brand, or they might have already decided to make a purchase before that paid search impression was even delivered. So our modeling methodology accounts for this baseline across various media, and we can see whether dollars spent earlier in the purchase cycle may have actually been more effective at driving success in the end. Several years later, it's been a while since we worked with 1-800-Flowers, but as we look across our client base and the industry in general, we see that search is still predominantly siloed and kept separate from other media that's more branding focused. Traditional metrics, like these ones listed here, still really dominate the space. But even branding efforts, traditional and digital media channels have their own silos in some cases and are not always being considered together. So how can we address this? Let's take a detour a bit higher up and talk about marketing evolution solutions on a little bit of a deeper level. The attribution that we talked about for 1-800-Flowers was not the end result. It is an interesting number and a number that the industry is buzzing about, but you really need to apply more data to decide what to do with that number and ultimately how it will impact your investment decisions across your media buy. So marketing evolution uses something we call SIRF, or a spend impact response function, to connect the dots. For all the media we measure, we pull together 3 things to build a SIRF. The first is impact, and this is the piece we've spoken a bit about when we're talking about pulling data into our individual respondent level models. At varying frequencies, what kind of impact does different media drive? The second is a reach frequency curve. So what's the relationship between reach and frequency for a given media, and also how much reach potential is out there? If a niche magazine is great at driving impact amongst its readers, but there's only a few thousand people reading the magazine, the investment needs to match that reach potential. Excuse me. And then lastly, we need costs, the piece that can get us at our return on investment in the end. Pulling those data together, we create this curve that tracks how impact increases in relation to spend. And we can do this for any media channel, comparing them side by side. You see several examples here. The steeper the curve is, like the yellow magazine curve in this example, the more efficient that media is. And the taller the curve, TV in this case goes highest, the biggest reach and spend potential that they have. And when we look at these curves in relation to one another, they really fuel our ultimate budget recommendations. These curves are dynamic, though. They look static in this example. But if you think about this Venn diagram here on the lower right, having all these touch points in the same attribution model allows us to identify how these different media work together, how they overlap, and how sequencing of them might be important. So in the example charted here, search only reaches the spend point that it's at because of the spend in TV, the spend in digital, and the spend in magazine. If you change one variable for one of the media, say the overall spend or the CPM, it'll impact the shape and the magnitude of the curve for all the other medias. And this is important for search in particular because there's so much overlap with search between other media channels and drivers. So if we come back to search in particular, the attribution we measured for 1-800-Flowers was the first step. But the current marketing evolution offering takes that understanding and puts all those siloed media channels into one barn, as I like to use in this example. Here's an example of search in the media mix. It's from a client study, but the values have been changed a bit in this example. The impact to frequency curve is on the left, and we've got impacts driven by search plotted with other media. With the data we're pulling in via web analytics that I talked about earlier, the frequency that we're counting for search in this case on the x-axis is really the number of times you're driving an individual to your website via search, which aligns with the cost per click structure in that media. You can see that this curve is pretty strong here. It's steeper and therefore more efficient than some of the other medias in terms of impacting people over exposures. The first exposure from 0 to 1 looks like it's really the strongest, the most impactful. And then after around 10 exposures, your ability to further influence your customer seems to flatten out. When we look at the SERF on the lower right, the spend to impact response function, search is the purple curve sort of down here in the middle. It's perhaps not as strong as you might expect based on the strong impact curve that we talked about, but in this case, it's because of high costs for this particular client. So the software algorithms take a look at to place each dollar where it can have the most value and look at efficiency trade-offs across the media to ultimately compare them one against the other. And ultimately, what all this data is going to fuel is this, spend recommendations. And that these take into account how these media dynamically work together. So in this illustrative example, the recommendation for search is actually to decrease spend a bit and put some of those dollars to work in other media. So these two spend scenarios are the same, but the optimization estimates that the changes by shifting dollars from one media to the others would increase overall impact by around 14% in this case. So I've pumped you with lots of information here, and I'm sure you can see some instances more than others where you could put an action plan together. But let me suggest 3 steps to get us started, and really starting with the data connection, which is really the easiest thing to do to get going. Number 1, connect us with the right people. There's almost certainly a team of people on your side who manage your web analytics, and we'd love to talk to them and help them understand what we're trying to accomplish and start that process. Number 2 is really to decide what metrics define marketing success for you. Just like with reporting from all other media, there is a lot of data in these web analytics tools, and trying to look at too many conversion points or too many buckets of keywords could dilute the actionable findings we can take away. So if we can get together and really match up your most important goals with the details of the data, we'll be setting ourselves up for success. And lastly, number 3, creating the data linkage. This is really the easy part. It's a pretty simple process. We add code to our surveys or to your site to pass back and forth identifiers for individual people that allow us to match information on a one-to-one level. So we'll work with the team to facilitate that process, and have in the past set it up and got it churning within a few days. So it's not too hard to do. From there, we'll really have the fuel we need to get started. So easy as 1, 2, 3. Well, our main goal here was to talk about search in the media mix. I did want to take just a moment to give you a teaser into some of the value that can come from other digital data sources as well. So these are areas where we might move once you feel like you've kind of nailed search and gotten that part right. We've talked at length now about how connecting data to the individual to understand their path of exposure and actions to purchase can improve attribution. And that gets us at the where. Where on the purchase highway should I connect with people for maximum effect? Adding segment data from the digital space, from the programmatic buying ecosystem and Facebook in particular, can help us start getting at the who question. So by attaching demographics to our data, we've always been able to help understand who was being best impacted by various marketing efforts and where to find them. Facebook and programmatic buying, that ecosystem, hold the keys to so much of this information, allowing us to go far beyond age, gender, and income, those traditional demographics that we ask some of our individual respondents about. For folks in our model, we're pulling in their Facebook likes, interests, categories they may fall into, books they've read, movies they've watched, as well as information about what segments they might fall into in the programmatic space through data suppliers like Exalate in the real-time bidding space. So things like, are you a political junkie? Have you recently purchased a car or a home? Are you a frequent pet food buyer? All of these things, 3,000 different segments that we have access to, and more from individual client setups. There are two ways we can use all this segment data, really. The first is to fuel target level recommendations for buying on Facebook and in the programmatic buying space. If we find that people who are fans of 1-800-Flowers, for example, on Facebook, or fall into an Exalate-defined recent flower buyer segment, respond really positively to your advertising, we can recommend that you spend money in those channels on Facebook or with a DSP to buy media targeted at those audiences. And then the second way we can use that data, I think, is really interesting also. If we know that people who like 1-800-Flowers on Facebook we know that they're not just on Facebook. We know they're also perhaps reading Good Housekeeping magazine or watching HGTV. And our tools allow us to look across those media for those people, find them in other spaces as well. So our budget optimizations will factor in that overlap in audiences and account for that in our spend recommendations so that we are really reaching the right people in the right places at the right time across traditional and digital media. So I think it's pretty cool to be able to use this digital information in your traditional channels as well. Here's an example of what I was just talking about, those two different ways we're using this data. It's an example in the programmatic buying space and illustrates how we use that data and how they improved ROI. So we ran 3 different scenarios for a client. Again, the numbers have been changed here a bit, keeping the total spend level constant. And the first scenario on the far left was a budget allocation scenario that we ran that didn't include any of this digital segment data. There were no programmatic media levers in our software tools, so what that means is we didn't do any recommendation for spend against them or include that at all in the optimization exercise. And you can see that that scenario predicted an impact on 5.15 million people. In the middle scenario, we included the programmatic levers that we measured. So in this case, we allowed the process to make recommendations for spend against those top performing segments that we looked at in our analysis. In this case, maybe it was political junkies, people with kids in car seats, recent home buyers, just as an example. The recommendations were at that targeted level. And the recommendations we put together were to be purchased through this real-time bidding process in that space. By allowing the system to decide to allocate dollars into that space, we increased the overall impact in the scenario by around 33,000 individual people. And in the final scenario on the right, we included the programmatic levers I just mentioned and allowed the optimization engine to optimize across all media, including traditional, based on where people falling into those top segments could be found. So if kids in car seats, folks, or political junkies were also reading CNN or watching ESPN, that impacted what our recommendations were coming out to as well. So when we did that, the total impact went up to almost 300,000 people, a 5.5% increase overall. So each layer of data that we added here improved ROI by increasing impact while the cost stayed the same, which I think is pretty cool. So where to head from here? I think now I've filled your heads with a lot to think about, I hope. And I hope that I've achieved my goal of teaching you about the power of connected data from the marketing evolution perspective and giving you some first steps to get going there yourself. Let me just finish by recapping a little bit with a few thoughts that connect back to those tenets of an agile system that we talked about a bit ago. The first, again, connect the dots on your data. Let's start with the web analytics data connection we talked about so that we can really help drive better answers for search and go from there. There's just so many pieces that we can pull together, and it's really not as difficult as you think to pull them all into one place and create that data hub. The second is monitor your customers as individuals. The more you know about them as people and what makes them tick and what makes them move along the purchase highway, the more successful you'll be at bringing them to you at different places along that road. And then lastly, remember what success looks like and make sure that the information you're bringing together really supports that effort. The same campaign objectives need to be present across the board, because even if your teams aren't working together across different media channels, your media will be whether you like it or not. So the more you're able to keep that one goal for success working for you across your different media efforts, across teams within your organization, the more success that you'll have. So thank you, and I think we'll maybe look at some questions. I look forward to diving into this with you more deeply and personally sometime soon.
Hi, Darcy. So I'll go. By all means, if you have questions, please type them in, and we'll go. Okay. Darcy, thank you so much for taking us through that. I want to talk to you about a couple of the different points that you raised and dig a little deeper if we can.
That'd be great.
So you mentioned, I think you used a phrase that the connection between online data to help improve the targeting of offline data was pretty cool. I think that's a great description. And now I think you said that there was, what, a 5.4% improvement in being able to use that online data to help offline targeting and improve offline advertising effectiveness. Is that right?
So the 5.4 did include that. It also included the fact that we were including in our recommendations spend that was focused on those media channels that were the source for the data. So we included recommendations in the programmatic buying space and on Facebook. And we use that data to inform our decisions about where media should be placed on the traditional side. So that combination of using them in two different ways got us to 5.4%.
Got it. So in the search example, then what you're describing with this connected data also could relate to search, right? So the ability to say, oh, these are the people that are searching for you and coming to your website. You can also find them at high concentrations on these TV programs or in these magazines or in these geographies and so forth. Is that another application of what you were showing?
Absolutely. Yeah, by pulling all those pieces together into one data set, you really are able to see where and kind of how you can get at different people along the path. So identifying someone as a searcher is really the same as identifying them as someone who likes your brand on Facebook or falls into a particular programmatic category. Knowing that about them and knowing where they are across your media efforts totally is a great piece of knowledge to use to get at them at the right place at the right time.
I just find that so interesting because so often we think about digital in its own silo, and we think about digital retargeting and behavioral targeting, but we don't think about that. The ability now with what you're showing with this more connected ecosystem of really being able to do that in any media.
Definitely.
Great. Okay, so let me jump to another question that you had that you touched on a bit. You showed an example where in some cases it may be worth spending less on search, and the logic for that is that the price can get bid up in search to where it's actually not a good deal. And I think that that's so interesting. I want to explore that a little bit more because you make the note that as oftentimes as we look at search, we look at the impact. How many clicks did we get? What conversion did we get? What did we pay for that click? But when you're looking at it more holistically, are you answering the question of what's the most cost-efficient way to get that sale or that action? And in some cases, depending on what the price is of search, that might not be the most cost-efficient way. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. So I think there's two pieces there, really. The attribution part that we talked about, even in the 1-800-Flowers example, whether all that impact that you're really driving is coming from search or whether it really should be shared amongst other media is the first piece. Connecting those data points to know what search is really doing. And then when we bill in costs and really are doing this surf building exercise that allows us to compare search to other media, we're really putting it on an equal playing field. So if search is more expensive than other media channels, that's going to be reflected in the recommendation. It pulls all of it together so that you're really both thinking about search as kind of an independent and a dependent variable that, how are your marketing efforts and external factors driving people to search, but also on a one-to-one comparison to other media, which is more efficient, where should the dollar be spent, and to get the maximum impact.
That's great. And there was some interesting academic research that had come out that showed that actually the second position in paid search tends to have a higher ROI than the first position because you pay less for it, and the people that continue to search deeper into that list tend to have higher conversion rates than someone who just clicks on the very top one. So this seems to help give marketers the answer of how much should you be willing to pay for that search and where do you want to be to maximize the return on investment.
Yeah, and doing that deep dive into position, keywords, etc. I think that's all data that can come into this data set as well to be considered in our analysis. So we can get into some deeper insights if that's something that's interesting for the marketer.
Great. Well, we've got a question that's come in here about what tools can we use to monitor search trends and help drive offline media marketing decisions. I think that I think they want you to describe a little bit more clearly which of these are marketing evolution tools, which of these are tying into Google, what other tools are part of that tool set that you're using to make some of these conclusions.
Yeah, and I think it is when I'm talking about a data hub, the example I'm using really is a hub that's facilitated by marketing evolution. So we have this individual respondent level set of information that we can use as a base for pulling in more data connectedness. So if you're using Google for some of your search reporting, if you're using Omniture or Web Trends or Google Analytics for your website tracking and analysis, anything that you might be using, it has the potential to be pulled in and applied to this data hub that we help to put together. The real question that we look at when we start that process is the information available at a log file level? If it's just aggregate numbers, it's definitely interesting and useful, and we can use that in some of our time series analysis to look at kind of overall trends. But our ideal situation is being able to pull in at an individual level that connection to any log files that you might have and be using. So I think we're pretty agnostic about who we can work with and connect with as long as that data exists.
Gotcha. So just to play it back, hub part is the marketing evolution research that you're doing that ties online and offline. You can connect to Omniture data on the website, you can connect to Google data, you can connect to lots of different data. But that cross that takes the bridge across from online media to offline is that marketing evolution hub research. Okay, well, there's another good question that came in here where we're being asked, can you talk more about making the connections across channels using a shared ID? So maybe it's just a more elaboration on that point that you're just making. Essentially, how to connect disparate cookie pools across display and search.
Yeah, and that is, has been a tricky piece about measuring search for a long time. We have ways that we've been looking at digital display for ages that are cookie-based, and they didn't always play together with search. So it is, again, using that, really the survey as a hub, this place where we know a lot about individual people, and then pulling these different data sources into that one place. So it doesn't really matter whether the cookies are playing together as long as you can match them all to one person in the end. So the systems don't need to be connected by themselves. This hub sort of facilitates the connection.
Got it. Yep. So now you're talking about different ways to experiment with search. I began some of my comments making the note that control groups, so the ability to do experiments, can help us really isolate the baseline effect. I'm thinking back to some of the work done for Macy's as a retailer and with Google, where different geo-targeting was used with search, so they could deliver types of ads into different geographies and then match to see what was happening in the offline stores. Do you have any tips for, and then I know with online, online certainly time of day or different days of the week has been used to be able to see who's actually going into the online website. Are there any other tips you have for how to create variation with search or create different experiments with major search players like Google? Or maybe I just said some of them.
Yeah, those were good examples right there. I mean, I think that really looking at an individual marketer's goals at the beginning of the campaign and seeing kind of strategies that they have across their media and being sure that we're pulling that in. So in the case that you just mentioned, that time series or time tracking, it's all there. That data is all there and just ripe for the taking. So it's just a matter of piecing it out and making sure that it's part of our experiment.
Got it. Okay. Well, as we're looking at the last few minutes of this call here, if you think about the synergies across the different media, search plays a very interesting role because in some cases, as you mentioned, people may already know they want to buy from that marketer or find more information from that marketer, and so they're using search as a navigation place to find the right section on somebody's website or to get to the website in itself, and therefore it sits in this natural path for discovery. What do you look at when you're trying to understand the difference between, say, the paid search part of it versus the organic and different optimizations you can do to make sure your page shows up in the organic search one? So are there any tips you have there for how marketers ought to be thinking about that?
I think that, in our analysis, we're able to really look at the source of a website visit. So if someone's coming from a click from a digital ad, for example, that's really such a different source than typing in the name of the website into a browser, doing a search, a branded search for that brand in particular. And that's different from, typing in flower delivery, for example, in the 1-800-Flowers case. Those different sources are available in the data set for analysis. So we can really look to see, of the people who engaged in an organic search, clicked on an organic search link versus a paid search link, people who came to the site through a click on a display ad, how did those experiences vary? What are their brand perceptions going in and coming out? And where should those people be hit in the future?
Now, there was two other things that I recall from some of the research that I found pretty fascinating. One was as you look at that chain of events of, okay, someone searched, going into the website, some of the research done, going back as far as the Ford F-150 in 2005 and certainly thereafter, did some experiments where they would survey people right after they searched and clicked on that, but right before they experienced the marketer's web page.
Yep.
And then they would survey another sample of people randomly set up. They searched, similar type of search, went to the web page, experienced the whole web page, and they surveyed them out there. And the goal was to isolate what was the impact of the search versus what was the impact of the website experience and where you might drop them in different pages. As you think about the contribution of search in terms of increasing brand value, what are some of the things that you think of as good ways to maybe experiment with your search copy or other suggestions?
I mean, I think that you're definitely right. There's a value that comes from just being exposed to the search engine results page, seeing that branding there, and then moving toward the next step, going to the website, clicking on that ad. That doesn't get accounted for in traditional search reporting much at all. If we're able to look at those exposures, do some copy testing, it's almost like looking at a more traditional media ad. You can see which ones are really driving an increase in brand perception or a link to sales, just at a pure branding level.
Gotcha. Now, one of the other things from some of the research is I recall this from some of the pharmaceutical work that we've done, was the way in which how TV advertising can really increase the amount of search volume. That classic synergy between those effects. What are some of your suggestions about how to think about whether or not there's the types of synergy that there might be between offline media and an increase in search activity? Any tips for the marketers out there on how to think about that or optimize that?
And I think that the first step is just kind of discovering where those strong synergies exist. So in a lot of cases, digital attribution modeling, it's pretty, not easy, but it's pretty easy to tie display to a purchase on the website, for example. The interesting stuff really comes from pulling in some of those traditional media sources as well as offline sales information. So if you can understand, what about different TV spots are driving people to search and ultimately to purchase, compare the effectiveness of one TV spot against another at doing that, it'll help you understand where to put those dollars going forward.
Great, and you've given certainly a great platform for how to connect all that data and bring that together to get to those answers. So I think we'll wrap up here at the end of the or as we get towards the next hour. And if you have any further questions or details that you would want, again, we do many these webinars primarily for the benefit of our clients. And so if you by all means talk to your client service team, email me directly or Darcy directly, and we'll help you get some of the answers to any questions you might have. And if there's other topics that you'd like us to tackle, please also feel free to suggest these. It's been a pleasure to be able to share with you some of this insight and information, and I will give Darcy the last word to wrap us up.
Yeah, and like Rex said, I definitely appreciate your time today. It's an exciting space that I love working in, and I can't wait to speak with you more about it in detail and kind of get at what will make your brands more successful.
Great. Thank you all today. Good night.
Thank you.